All right, let's set the scene. It's April 28th, 1988. You're in beautiful, sunny Hawaii. Aloha Airlines Flight 243 is getting ready for what should be a totally normal 35-minute flight from Hilo to Honolulu. For this particular plane, which had already flown 8 times that morning, this was just another day at the office.
But then, just 20 minutes into the flight, that beautiful sky, well, it suddenly became the ceiling. This quote right here, it just captures the absolute mind-bending shock of that moment. I mean, one second, you're thinking about your next drink. The next, you're looking straight up at blue sky.
And that's the big question, isn't it? That's what we're going to unpack today. How does an 18-foot section of an airplane just disappear mid-flight? And maybe even more amazing, how on earth did 94 people live through it?
So first, let's zero in on the exact moment this totally routine flight went completely off the rails. It all happened faster than anyone could possibly process.
The plane takes off at 1:25 p.m. For 20 minutes, it's business as usual. Flight attendants are up. They're serving drinks. Then, at 1:45, right as the plane hits its cruising altitude, there's this huge bang, followed by an immediate, violent rush of air. Just total chaos.
And get this for a chilling detail. One of the passengers, while she was getting on the plane, she actually saw a crack in the side of the fuselage near the door. But, you think to yourself, it's a major airline, they must know about this, it's gotta be fine. Little did she know, she was looking at a terrible omen.
And you have to understand the environment they were suddenly thrown into. We're talking about temperatures of minus 45 degrees Celsius, winds blasting through the cabin at 500 kilometers an hour, and a serious lack of oxygen. That's called hypoxia, which can knock you unconscious in minutes. By any logical measure, this was completely unsurvivable.
And yet, they did survive. Most of them anyway. And that brings us to the next incredible part of this story, the 13 absolutely terrifying minutes it took to get this crippled plane back onto solid ground.
Now we have to acknowledge the one tragic loss of life. A flight attendant, C.B. Lansing, was standing right where the fuselage tore open. The moment it happened, she was pulled out of the aircraft. She was the only fatality, a fact that just highlights how unbelievably miraculous it was that anyone else survived at all. Meanwhile, up in the cockpit, Captain Robert Schamsheimer and First Officer Mimi Tompkins were fighting for their lives and everyone else's. Their training just kicked in. They immediately grabbed their oxygen masks and threw the plane into a steep emergency dive to get down to air they could actually breathe.
But here's the thing, the problem was so much worse than it seemed. The force of the blast had actually bent the plane. The entire cockpit section was drooping, held on only by the floor beams. So the question wasn't just, can we land it? It was, will this plane even hold together long enough for us to try?
And look how quickly this all went down. Just 3 minutes after the explosion, they're on the radio with the Maui Tower. A minute later, they're down below 10,000 feet so everyone can breathe again. But then, as they're coming into land, the left engine fails. And despite all of that, they touch down safely. The whole ordeal, from the explosion to landing, took just 13 minutes. Unbelievable. So why weren't more people pulled from the plane like C.B. Lansing? What was the secret? Well, the answer is so simple, it's almost hard to believe. The seatbelt sign was still on. Because the plane had just reached cruising altitude, that little light was still illuminated. That simple fact, that one little rule, saved 94 lives. It's the single biggest reason this wasn't a much, much worse disaster.
Okay, so we've seen how they survived. Now let's play detective and figure out why this happened at all. And for that, we need to get into the science of the plane itself.
The main culprit here has a name: metal fatigue. Think about it like this. Every single time a plane goes up, the cabin gets pressurized and the metal skin expands just a tiny bit. When it lands, it contracts. Now, for a short-haul plane like this one, doing tons of flights every day, those cycles add up really, really fast. It's like bending a paperclip back and forth. Eventually, it just breaks. And this right here was the plane's Achilles heel. The fuselage was held together with an older method called cold bonding, which basically used a strong epoxy. The huge problem was that this type of glue was known to break down in warm, salty, humid air, like the air in Hawaii. As that epoxy failed over the years, all the stress was transferred to thousands of tiny rivets that were never designed to take that kind of load. Now, planes are designed to handle a single crack. They have features that stop a tear from spreading, kind of like ripstop fabric. But this wasn't one crack. This was something called multi-site damage. The best way to picture it is like a perforated line on a piece of paper.
There were thousands of tiny, invisible cracks that had formed along the rivet lines, and in one instant, they all connected and just unzipped.
You know, a technical failure this big never happens in a bubble. It was the final result of a long chain of human mistakes and system failures that allowed a known problem to fester until it became a full-blown catastrophe.
For starters, this Boeing 737 was designed to handle about 75,000 takeoffs and landings, or cycles. But because this particular plane was being used for so many short island hops day in and day out, it had already done nearly 90,000 cycles. It was being pushed way, way past its intended service life, which massively increased the risk of metal fatigue.
So who dropped the ball? While the official investigation from the NTSB found there was plenty of blame to go around, they pointed a finger at Aloha Airlines management for shoddy maintenance oversight. They called out the FAA for not forcing airlines to do inspections that Boeing itself had recommended. And they said both Boeing and the FAA were too slow to realize just how dangerous this bonding issue really was for older planes.
But as terrifying as this whole incident was, it had a massive silver lining. Its legacy actually made flying safer for every single one of us. So let's look at the changes that came directly out of this near disaster.
Well, the first thing that happened was a huge wake-up call. Inspectors started checking other older 737s, and what did they find? The same kinds of cracks. This wasn't a one-off problem with a single plane, it was a ticking time bomb across the entire fleet. The industry had to move, and it had to move fast.
And that led to a whole wave of new safety rules. Congress passed the Aviation Safety Research Act, the FAA created the Aging Aircraft Safety Program, and maybe most importantly, brand new inspection methods that could detect tiny cracks became mandatory. Stricter rules were put in place for any plane doing a lot of short flights to make sure this kind of fatigue would be caught long before it could ever cause another disaster.
And that leaves you with a final thought, doesn't it? The story of Flight 243 is terrifying, but it's also heroic, and in the end, it was revolutionary. It's a powerful reminder that in the world of aviation, progress is so often written in the wake of failure. It really makes you wonder, how many of the safety systems that we just take for granted today exist only because somewhere, a long time ago, something went horribly, terribly wrong?